Welcome, everyone. So happy to welcome you here to our Shuddhashar FreeVoice webinar. My name is Lisa Knight, and I'm very happy to introduce to us our moderator today, Nadeem Zaman, and he is author of the novels In the Time of the Others, The Inheritors, and also an author of short story collection Up in the Main House and Other Stories. And he teaches English at St. Mary's College of Maryland. And so we're delighted to welcome him, and he will introduce our guest speakers today.
Thank you, Lisa. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon and good evening. So our the title of our webinar today is Purity and Honor, Belonging, Identity, and the Violence of Tradition. And I'm so delighted to have with our guests, whom I will introduce now, Afrah Nasser. And Afrah Nasser is a non-resident fellow at the Arab Center, Washington, D.C. She is a freelance journalist and a human rights defender. Previously, she worked at Human Rights Watch as the Yemen researcher investigating international humanitarian law and international human rights law violations and abuses in Yemen. She is the recipient of the Committee to Protect Journalists International Press Freedom Award and many more awards. Her blog has been featured by CNN among the 10 must-read blogs from the Middle East. Nasser has written for and made appearances on numerous outlets, including Al Jazeera, The Monitor, Atlantic Council, Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and others. She holds a BA in English Linguistics from Sana'a University, Yemen, and an MA in Communication from the University of Gothenburg, Sweden. Welcome, Afrah Nasser. And our second participant is Professor Yasmin Saikia, who is a professor of history and is the first holder of the Distinguished Hart Nikachos Endowed Chair in Peace Studies at Arizona State University in the US. She is the co-director of the Center for Muslim Experience in the US, established at Arizona State University in 2022. Yasmin Saikia has authored several monographs, edited volumes, and numerous peer-reviewed articles and book chapters. Her book, Fragmented Memories Struggling to Be Thai a Home in India, won the Srikanta Datta Book Prize in the Social Sciences and Northeast India from the Nehru Memorial, Delhi, India in 2005. And Women, War, and the Making of Bangladesh, Remembering 1971 from 2011, won the Oral History Association Biennial Award, USA, in 2013. She is a recipient of multiple international fellowships and grants, including the prestigious National Endowment for the Humanities Collaborative Research Grant, Fulbright Fellowship, Harry Frank Guggenheim Fellowship, and multi-year senior fellowships from the American Institutes of Indian, Bangladesh, as well as Pakistan Studies. She is the editor-in-chief for Cambridge University Press's new series, Muslim South Asia, and serves on several editorial boards and is the vice president of South Asian Muslim Studies Association in the United States. She has held academic appointments at Carleton College, Minnesota from 1997 to 99, UNC Chapel Hill, and visiting positions at the University of Melbourne, the Center for Civilizational Dialogue at the University of Malaysia, and Center for the Study of Gender and Sexuality at American University in Cairo. In 2023, Yasmin Saikia was recognized as one of the 100 inspiring Indian Muslim women in the United States by the RBTC Global Leadership Team. Thank you both for joining us today. And so what I look forward to in over the next hour or so that will be in discussion is for this to be more a conversation than me leading, an interview style format. So that said, of course, I do have some points and questions that I would like to begin with to get us started, and then please feel free at any point to communicate with each other, to bring in your own questions, and then I believe about 10 minutes or so before we end, we will make some room for we'll make some time for questions from viewers. So I'll begin with Yasmin Saikia. Your essay in the Blood issue of Shuddhashar was so compelling, and it kind of framed the current situation, specifically about purity and belonging and nationality in India. And so you mentioned some texts, some source texts, out of which the current BJP government understands what India is and what it is through this ideology. So can you just give us some of the details of that? It's, you know, in your own words, and how you talked about it in the essay to get us started.
Thank you, Nadeem, and Arfa, for joining this conversation. Thank you for your comments, Nadeem, about the essay. I'm a historian, as you've, when you introduced me. So I do look deep into the archives and documents to understand current situation. And I really look at history as not a thing of the past, but something that actually influences the future. So, as you mentioned, the current political situation in India is very determined, or has a very has an orientation for a cultural nationalism. Some people call it ethno-nationalism, and I would call it a cultural nationalism of a particular kind that looks at or reframes and weaponizes textual information for political ends. It doesn't mean that a text is informing politics, but politics draws on certain ideas that it then reframes it for their present purposes. So in my essay, since the theme is on blood and purity, and this is a very significant and important issue in India, blood and purity, who is truly citizen in the modern sense, but in the older sense, it would be who belongs and who is an accepted person within this territory or culture called India, is drawn from different kinds of texts, but the most important text is Manusmriti. The Manusmriti is not a single text, actually. There are 50 different versions of it, and they're not all consistent. It is not written by a single person. It was probably composed by different people. There's a lot of controversy, a lot of discussion about the origin of Manusmriti, but we do know that it is the British colonial government in the late 18th century. William Jones, in 1776, translated something called the Manusmriti and made it available as if it was a single codified book in order to make the laws for the Hindu population of India. Now, we don't know if actually Hindu people used this as a law book before the British did it, but it is in the Manusmriti of the British production that there are a lot of these codes of legal codes, one might say, not prescribed, but suggested that this is how one should live their life to be a good caste-based Hindu. So Manusmriti basically deals with the Brahmins and the Kshatriya Varna. It is not called caste in Manusmriti. It is called Varna. Varna is occupational. And then there are references to the Shudras and the Vaishyas, but very minimal. It's a verse form. It's written over 2 centuries, so-called, from the 1st century AD to the 3rd century AD. It means we can go into all kinds of historical understanding why the Manusmriti was compiled, or this book that we call the Manusmriti in its various forms were compiled over 2 centuries. But many of these verses, it's in a verse form, right? So many of these verses, I believe over 2,000 plus verses, are about the Varna system, of which around 150 of them connect directly to questions of marriage. So who can marry whom and what kind of progeny can come out of that union is a blood-related thing. And then there are around 50 verses on occupational purity. So blood and occupation are directly related. And this is the background or the foundation on which the colonial government established the Hindu code of law, which today get then reproduced in multiple ways in both the cultural sphere of nationalism and in the legal sphere of personal law for Hindus.
One of the things that speaks so closely to me is that in the classroom, whatever the text is that we're engaging with, I always encourage students to take a text as a living document. And as you said, history doesn't live in the past, but it is here, it is being always analyzed and reanalyzed and restudied. And so to take that form and to kind of have this understanding of, oh, my understanding of this text is, this is what is telling me who I am and why I belong. Because in the case of blood, that is powerful, right? When we say, well, you know, blood is thicker than water, kind of whatever cliche that we want to bring in, but to add it to an idea of nationality, of belonging, and then also exclusion becomes just this, it takes on this aspect that is, frankly, to me, is terrifying. And also kind of shows the power, right, of language and text and interpretation. And of course, all of us here, that is what we do. However, I think, you know, I know where to draw the line between saying this is interpretation. I'm not using this to kind of propel a belief that I want everyone to accept, and everyone that doesn't accept it is not, you know, is not included, doesn't belong. But I do find that you identified this specific set of texts as that. So what I want to do
But let me tell you,
yes,
this
please,
text
yeah.
was not extremely important, I would think, in
Yes.
the ancient period,
Yes.
because it's one of the many Dharma Shastras, right?
Yes.
The core law books. But it is the British, as I said, the colonial government needed to create laws for
That's it.
Hindus and Muslims in order
Yes.
to divide people in India,
Yes.
because there are many ways in which you divide, right?
Right.
And for the British colonial government, law, religion, census, history writing were the devices through which they actually separated communities. So
Exactly.
in order to separate community and figure out a legal code, they basically upgraded, I would think, the Manusmriti, which is, honestly speaking, extremely anti a whole lot of people, not
Yes.
simply, the people who today are excluded in the, as you're saying, in the political context of present day India. As you said, there are ways and methods of excluding people. So, but their exclusions are many in the Manusmriti. As I said, there's very little reference to the Shudras and the other Vaishyakas. And people who don't belong are called Mlech, right?
Yeah.
There are people who will never belong.
Yeah.
And the Mlech category is also a moving category in the Manusmriti. So it is within the territory of Arya. It means you can go into these details like a history class, right?
Sure.
Like the land of the Aryas, the Aryavarta. And the Aryavarta is very limited in the beginning. But as expansion takes place, new people, and Romila Thapar, the very famous historian, has documented it extensively. As Aryavarta kept expanding, it included perhaps even the place where I originally come from, called Assam, which was originally considered to be outside the land of Aryans, right? And was considered land of the Danavas and the Dashus, the monsters and the demons, because they're Tibeto-Mongoloid people. But over time, as Hinduism spread, some of these areas became included willy-nilly, right? But there are some people and some groups of some territories that are of the land of the Mlech, the polluted, so purity and blood, right? And who is now the polluted, the untouchable, that you can never really include in the community called people within the Varna. And if you do not part of a Varna system, you are an outcast, right? So the Muslim becomes the quintessential Mlech in this concept. And so Aryabhatta today territorially can include almost all of India. But the Muslims cannot belong because they are not from the sacred land and the sacred group, which is pure and connected by blood. So
pure.
it's a much more powerful concept. The British thought that they were just creating a legal code, but a legal code is now, as I use the word, a weapon.
A weapon, indeed it is. I think that's a great segue, bringing up the separation, the religious, this final point you made about who now is the other, as it were, Afrah. Your equally compelling essay about misrepresentations of these kinds, right? So you point out, you contextualize by talking about how religious misrepresentations and teachings are indeed weaponized in a different way, right? So I'll just begin with those kind of keywords and ask you to give us in more detail how you see these interpretations and what you talk through your essay as it applies specifically to your work.
Yes, thank you. Really delighted to be part of this panel with Prof. Yasmin and Dr. Nadeem. Thank you so much for Lisa and Shuddhashar FreeVoice for inviting me. When I was invited to write for this issue and the theme was blood, I immediately remembered a conversation I had with a friend. She's from Iran. She was political human rights activist, and she was political refugee in Sweden, as I was at that time. And I remember we were talking about honor killings in our countries, so in Iran, in Yemen, in the Middle East. And we kept saying, like, how can anyone kill their own blood? Their own blood, their own blood. And that idea just kept in my head for a long time. This conversation happened like 13 years ago in 2011, when I became first political refugee in Sweden. And then after that, I started to educate myself more about gender equality and inequality and gender-based violence. And then unfortunately, like more and more news came about like a father killing his daughter or a brother killing his sister or something related to honor. And that also, like, for me, that an opportunity to educate myself more and more. And as much as it is tragic, it screams to me the need for gender equality in our countries. So, but if I go back to your question, like,
Yes,
I think in many cultures where honor killings occur, deeply entrenched patriarchal values shape the interpretation of religious teachings. So teachers and religious figures often present family honor and gender roles in a way that justifies violence against women, positioning women as like carrier or barrier of family reputation.
Yeah.
And this interpretation transforms modesty and obedience into a moral obligation for women, where any like division from prescribed behavior is seen as dishonorable, and punishment becomes like acceptable solution. However, I think, and this is what I stressed on the essay that I wrote, I think mainstream Islamic teachings don't condone honor killings. The Quran emphasizes justice and mercy, and there is no explicit religious backing for killing in the name of family honor. In fact, Islamic scholars have argued that these acts are severe distortion of faith, as Islam upholds the sanctity of life and individual dignity. But unfortunately, these misinterpretations continue to persist, backed by cultural traditions rather than like religious doctrine, which makes it really hard for women to navigate between the social pressure and those religious beliefs, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
As a follow-up, and then I'll ask Yasmin's opinion on this too. But since this is what you do, right? You devote your work, your journalism, to combating and exposing and writing about. What is your experience? How difficult a task? This is a monumental task, I would imagine, because of everything you said. Some of these understandings and belief systems are so entrenched, even though they may be not, within, as you mentioned, the Quran, or, even scholarship that interprets. My gosh, I mean, what has your experience been trying to correct this, trying to have conversations, trying to, shine the spotlight on what is and what is completely, made up by patriarchies and, these weaponized, violent, anti-women.
It's so difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so difficult. Like Dr. Nadeem, I couldn't even like share the article on my social media. I couldn't share it on Facebook, like this event, for example.
Yeah.
And I'm always part of like feminist groups, but
Yes.
I do it something as like a grassroots
Yeah.
thing, and I do it like on a like I do it with aim of impact in what I do, but not to shock, because uh, like in Facebook, for example, I have so many relatives who follow me, and I'm already like regarded as a bad girl because I'm not wearing hijab as a Yemeni girl, where I'm expected to have a certain image. So how about I say what is inside in this head and
Yeah.
talk about, how honor killing is, a crime against women, and how gender inequality is the root of all these honor killings. So look, even though I'm really struggling with coming out, as you
Yes.
say,
Yes.
I don't know
Sure.
how to say it,
Sure.
but I will not stop from doing what I believe in with the limited space that I have. As we speak today in Lebanon, there was another attack on
Yes.
like Hezbollah operatives.
Yes.
My heart breaks out. I have so many friends there. Actually, most of my feminism that I learned was from Lebanese feminist friends.
Okay.
But you have to like it's like there is no good time for
No.
people in the Middle East to talk about, as if those things about gender equality is like a luxury in times of chaos and violence and
Sure.
genocide. And so it's really difficult task. I remember like I prepared an answer for this question, but
Mhm.
I just like, I'm really influenced by the news. I was like glued on TV and my phone trying to find any answer. Like, what is this new wave where Israel is targeting their enemy through pagers, through mobiles that could explode in your pocket anywhere at any time? What kind of new world of military technology that we are entering to,
Yes.
where, also like where I come from, Yemen, the Houthi armed group are also a participant and involved in this. So with all this geopolitics and how the region is always on fire, it really feels like as if this is like a luxury to talk about those issues about blood, belonging, identity. But the more I educate myself, the more I know injustice anywhere
Yeah.
is injustice everywhere.
Yes,
And
indeed.
we don't, as long as we don't deal with those issues from a drastic, point of view, or a drastic level, we will continue to
Yes.
like this kind of situation by itself to me is a result of this colonial military force at the heart of Palestine.
Yes.
where some Arab countries are also complicit by their silence, and only Houthis are like doing the unprecedented thing. Anyway, like the topic diverges to many things, but I think what is personal is political, and what is political is personal. So women in this kind of atmosphere have little window to speak about, like, stop honor killings. Those organizations that I mentioned in the essay, like Kafa in Lebanon. Kafa means enough, by the way, in Arabic, where they work to stop gender-based violence, and they intervened in so many cases. There is so many documentaries about their work. They do amazing work. It's like a really heavy task, but there are feminist groups that are doing their best, like Nadra also in Egypt, and also in Yemen. But it's as I was explaining, it's always under the table with doing like a grassroots thing without the like I remember the Iranian women cutting their hair on camera. That was like a very strong statement. But some women prefer to do things like, slowly, quietly, and that by itself to me is still a form of resistance and action, while you're adapting to the circumstances you're in.
Yes. Yasmin, Saikia, would you like to respond to any of that? I would love to hear.
This is a rich conversation from
Yes,
Afrah.
it is.
What do you prioritize, and how can you think of certain issues at a certain time, and they take different kind of both potency and relevance, and sometimes have to be put on the sideline because there are more other pressing issues. In the case of, unfortunately, in India, this issue of blood impurity is not an academic topic alone. It is a deeply political and a very much in the public sphere topic. So it's not a luxury for us. It is our survival. It's an existential crisis that we are having based on this issue of who belongs and who cannot belong. And unfortunately, other than unlike the Middle East, which is in the news, what goes on in India rarely gets discussed outside. So the personal remains personal, and perhaps national does not become international and global. So as a member of the minority community called Muslims of India, particularly from Assam, but as an academic and a scholar of South Asian history, with my original specialization is medieval Indian history, right? I do very contemporary work now because the medieval, which is considered by the British, as I said, they also divided up time, they divided history, right? And they periodized history into ancient, medieval, modern, and by that token, medieval as Muslim. And if you bring the European lens into medieval, it's the Dark Ages, right? So the Dark Ages of Muslims must be removed from the blight of the modern nation, in a way. So I represent that community both as a scholar and personally. I lived that life, right? So when I talk of scholarship, and I teach South Asian history, but very, very rarely at Arizona State University, for a variety of different reasons, my students are very receptive to understanding and knowing problems. The youth I find very inspiring, and I respect them tremendously for the capacity to actually engage with problems that are happening in very distant places and may perhaps not even connect in any way to their lives. And they make it very intimate for themselves by bringing questions of justice, basically human justice, right? And they relate to those issues well. I don't teach it often. I teach it very rarely, but I have had very interesting students and interested students who were inspired, particularly at UNC, I used to teach it quite a lot, who were inspired then to go on and actually do activism work, even in Palestine and things like that, because that was closer to them, right? But it was a very different time. Talking about in a scholarly level is easier. because you can choose where you want to go, what conferences you want to speak, how you sort of decide who are the people, where you like to publish. So there are lots of different ways in which you can determine the spaces in which you can have this very difficult conversation. Nonetheless, it is not very easy. The sphere is really becoming narrower and narrower. It is, as you mentioned, Afrah, it is in the public discourse that people who really need to know the problem, you can inform them the least, because it is in that arena that there is a lot of disbelief, criticism, and in fact, trolling you and threatening you. I have had people who call me in my office number and threaten that they will kill me for writing things about the humanity of everyone in India, including the people who have now been declared to be illegal and undocumented and foreigners, and even called as roaches and rats, and kind of dehumanization. And when I write in the public sphere, I have got people threatening me, saying they are not Indians, and how can you take a position with them? So it's very difficult to actually educate the people that we need to make connections with and say, look here, we are all actually living in the same place called planet Earth, and we live in a tiny little place within that tiny place called planet Earth, called India. We have to learn to live with one another. This was our history of living with one another. So let us make this work so that our lives, all our lives, are not steeped in anger and hatred, but rather in feelings of connections and humanity, and a feeling that we are all working towards a better future for the country and globally. Only when we take care of our own home, we can take care of others in a way. So let's take care of India, which is our home, and but it's a very difficult message to get across. And it's almost impossible, Nadeem, if you ask me. At this moment, I live in fear of my scholarship.
Yes.
Because this is my bread and butter,
Yes.
right? I do this as a scholar. This is my academic life.
Yeah.
And if I cannot write about these issues, and I cannot use the knowledge that I have gathered from my teachers and the teachers before that, how do I pass it down to a future generation? I live in this absolute fear of speech, and I have created silence around me in order to sort of not go to that dark place to think there is no home.
Right. You've both used certain words that are also very kind of part of my concern, which is identity, belonging. And you just mentioned this idea of home. And I continue to have this complex journey with them. So before we all gathered and began our conversation, we were, Dr. Saikia and I were talking about...
Oh, please call me Yasmin.
Yasmin, okay, all right. And please, Afrah, call me Nadeem. So we were speaking about, for example, that I was mentioning that my grandfather on my mother's side was born in a city called Karimganj, which is in Assam. And at the same time, I was born in Bangladesh, and I was born into a Muslim family. And on the other hand, I have this family tree on my dad's side that I saw that positions, or rather charts the history back to a person from Yemen who moved from Yemen to Bengal in the 14th century. And from him, we draw our lineage. His name was Sadruddin Quresh. And his shrine is still in Sylhet in Bangladesh. So, and then I moved to this country when I'm a young person, and everything I write about, everything I, have kind of, studied and engaged with has to do with, identity. What is it? Am I, living in the US with all of these multifarious, aspects? Which one am I, which one am I inhabiting when? And then when I go to Bangladesh, I've been away from there long enough to not be, I don't live there. I don't, I'm not guided by how life is over there. And then, being in the current climate that we are in the US, about these very things, who belongs, who's a pure American, as if there was such a thing. If you're, you know, if you come from a lineage of you know, of migration and immigration. So what is identity? How do you, you know, Afrah Nasser, how do you understand identity in your work?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I think we're increasingly living in the diaspora.
Yeah.
Like we're diasporic people. And it's more and more, I think. But, you know, when I look back, I think of my grandfather who migrated from Yemen to Ethiopia.
Mm.
And I was actually born in Ethiopia. And I have like half of my family are from Ethiopia and the other half from Yemen. And I don't see my identity as it's half this, half that. I see my identity as double, you know?
Yeah.
And it's something I always struggled with when I was a kid, but the more and more I travel around the world and meet other people from different culture, from different countries, especially the more I meet people with who I call like third culture kid, who are like this person that is the result of two cultures being
Yes.
combined.
Yes.
These are the people that I just connect with, and we have like, you know, like the jokes. It's like the same humor about being described this in that place and described that in the other place. So, for example, in Ethiopia, I'm like when they gossip about me and I hear them in the transportation, for example, like look at that foreigner. And then when I'm in Yemen, look at that Ethiopian girl who has like African forehead. That is how they talk about. And that description, when I was a kid, it was very troubling because I thought that was an attack on my identity, an attack on, and I didn't have a language to that. I didn't like, my only way to fight it was to hide as much as I can. So in Yemen, I tried to hide my Ethiopian background, and that was one reason why I delved into Yemeni politics. I wanted to show that I'm like Yemen expert more than any Yemeni who knows about Yemen. I know more Yemen that you know.
Yes.
And then the older I think and the more experience I have, I think the milestone to me, or the defining point, was the Yemen war. When the war started in 2015, that was like such a polarizing moment where every Yemeni started to box the other. They wanted him or her to identify themselves if they are part of this group or that group. And I found myself in that moment trying to say, you know, I'm a little bit of this and that. I'm from Ethiopia and Yemen and Sweden, and I'm like, I don't fit in that box.
Yeah.
And that gave me like credibility for a lot of Yemenis, actually, that I'm not like biased, or I'm not with like certain ideology being like biased to this front or the other group or this group. And I think the more you read and the more you are open to different cultures, I think the less you're always cautious about your identity. At this particular moment, when we started the Zoom session, I was like, wow, what a global citizen I became.
Yeah.
I was so proud of that. Like for a second, really, it crossed my mind.
Yes.
And it was like, I'm like, I should be proud to be part of this intellectual group. Like, I know we're talking about blood identity and the thing I wrote about honor killing, but it gives me a hope that
yes.
It's not bad as sometimes I think as you know, sometimes when you're from the Middle East, by default you're pessimistic, but like to be contacted by the magazine, it's in Norway, by like honoring Bangladeshi author
Yeah.
Eliza, contacting me with all her knowledge, being part of this issue, and even previous issue I wrote about. I forgot what I did write about it. I wrote another essay before this, but it's like, I think identity is a work in progress all the time.
Yes.
And and sometimes I look forward like to how I am. I watch sometimes Oprah Winfrey. She's 70. And like, I wonder how I will be when I'm 70. What kind of like, how I will feel my identity and my belonging to the world. Like I'm very excited to see how that will develop with time. Yeah.
I think how we have this exchange is the best that we have at our behest. That it is identity is fluid, can we say?
Absolutely.
It is a re-engagement, a kind of redefinition. So Yasmin, would you please speak to that word for you and your understanding, scholarship, personal.
And actually, I want to ask Yasmin,
please.
how was that in the medieval time? Like, did people really struggle with their identity at that time, or did they think of it as fluid as we try to contextualize it now?
Yeah.
Wonderful question, Afrah and Nadeem. I wrote my second book, I think, was all of this question of identity in India, right? And read extensively at that time. And your question about, push it even beyond medieval. Let's go to the ancient, the Greek philosophers, Herodotus had written that if you step into a river now and step into it, I mean, I'm paraphrasing it, and again, step it after a second, it's not the same river. It had changed. The stream had changed. The water had changed. What had flowed through it. As you said, Nadeem, it's very fluid. But I'm at the same time not a postmodernist to say that everything is relative and there's nothing there for you to grasp onto. Like, as you yourself said, tracing your genealogy back to, an ancestor who's originally from Yemen, or as Afrah said, connecting Ethiopia with Yemeni. You identify, no matter where you go. You may be in Sweden right now, you may be in the US later on, wherever you are, you do carry the stories of your past, not just your past, but the past before your past, right? Yes. Your parents, your grandparents, your ancestors. As I consider, I tell this to people, as you said, bring the personal in it, that in India, I tell people sometimes in conversation that I do not come back here every year just to do research. Research I can even do in a library. I'm a historian. I can, the archive is there. And as you said, there are people all over now. Everybody's diasporic. There are enough Indians, Pakistanis, Bangladeshis that I can interview right here for my oral history projects. I go back to India because this is the land of my ancestors. My ancestors are buried here. Yes. Right? As you said yourself, Nadeem, the shrine of your ancestor. Yes. My ancestors are buried here, and it's a place of pilgrimage for me. Yes. Come here because this is the home of my soul. I wouldn't be who I am if I didn't have these ancestors. I just don't come from nowhere. I may be everywhere, as you're saying, like a global citizen, but I come from somewhere. Yes. My past comes from somewhere, and I connect to it. And I will not give up on it because that was the love of that place that brought them there, right? Like you, Nadeem, I can trace my family. I think my father's family is one of the original settlers recorded in history of Assam as the Muslim settlers, okay? And it's recorded. This is not just family story. This is recorded in copperplate inscriptions, and they were given this title that I still continue, which is the Saikia title. Now, in that copperplate inscription, it says very clearly that this man came from Delhi in 1594. He's the grandson of a person who had come from Delhi. It's a grandson who has been now upgraded to the nobility by the king of Assam and given a royal woman in marriage and settled in Assam now. This is a very clearly recorded history. I have not found recorded material about Muslim settlement from families that have been preserved like my family had preserved. My mother's family, on the other hand, came to Assam in the late 17th, early 18th century under another king's kind of impetus and interest to bring in skilled people from outside of Assam to glorify the kingdom of Assam, and he's known as Rajaswar Sinha. That is recorded also in the Chronicles of Assam, that 7 families were brought from Bengal to settle in Assam to improve the royal court culture. And my mother's family comes from the royal atelier, who did the wardrobe of the king, right? So there are people who were engravers, people who were expert architects. There are 7 of these families, right? And many of the Muslims of the region of what we call Eastern Assam or Upper Assam, the British, again, as I said, divide land, right, in multiple ways, and they call that area Upper Assam. Many of the Muslim families are actually the progeny of those 7 families, right? So we can trace our roots to a place, okay? And that place has meaning for us. It's not simply a territory. It's emotions, it's memories, it's love, right?
Yes.
And so while I may live in the United States, I have lived here longer than I have lived anywhere in the world. I've lived in India for only barely 20 years of my life, right? And but it is, home is for me the place where my ancestors are buried and who had created dreams of a future there. So I'll keep going back and I'll keep having that connection. Identity is fluid, as you've said. You can have multiple different passports. You can change, but your connection to your history and to your, and I'm not talking of history and just genealogy of this blood and purity. I'm talking of this love between you, your parents' parents. It's a relationship of love. You can't give up on this love. And the place is the abode of love, and the place of your mother, and the place that you call as your country. Right? And America is as much my country. It doesn't cease to be my country if I also claim India to be my country. I'm a person, as Amir Khusro, who I write about in my thing, wrote about himself as a Hindu Turk. I can call myself as a Hindu Muslim American. That is my history.
And the quote here is that all the beauty of the world is but a speck of dust in India's incomparable splendor. That's
it. And then in one of the verses later on, he writes of himself as he writes of himself as a Hindu Turk.
Yeah.
So what is Hindu? Hindu is not a religion. It's a place. It's a love. It's a connection to the memory, to the reality of being born in that place and feeling a sense of connection. So where you are born remains your motherland. No matter how many other places you adopt as your place of abode.
Right. And so we are back to kind of completely problematizing, if not, I would say, kind of rendering obsolete any meaning of this idea of purity. We have more evidence, and we can prove in more ways that is just, it only has any kind of agency that it does when it's weaponized in the ways that we've discussed. It does not, other than that, it has no standing, as I hear it.
Not to me. If it is identity, blood, purity can all be good if we all think the human is the pure of the purest beings created.
Sure.
We don't need to divide ourselves as human beings. No. We are the most pure creation of, if you believe in divinity, there is a divine creation, and we are the most pure creation, called the human. So let us respect and elevate one another rather than divide each other.
Sure. Yes. Afrah, did you have any thoughts on that, or?
I just want to say I remember the other issue that I wrote, which is the war issue, and I wrote about no war, no peace in Yemen. It's in this limbo. But I was just going to clap with everything that Yasmin said.
All right.
Anything to add? Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Absolutely. I'm joining. I've been listening to what I see as sort of a journey in this conversation. You know, you started off talking about texts and history and division and the othering, right? And, you know, whether it's the othering and it's happening in India, the othering in families, and all the pain around that, right? And then you start talking about your own activism as teachers, as scholars, as writers, right? And how much you are embodying everything that you value and that you try to teach about, right? Embodying it through your own actions as well as what you write and do. And I love that you ended up with some hopefulness, right? About ways in which we can challenge those assumptions about difference and purity and things that cause so much pain in the world and so much discrimination. So I was inspired listening to you, and thank you for leaving us with those really, really heartfelt words, both of you and Nadeem as well. So
my pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you.
Well, thank you for organizing this, and thank you for this wonderful conversation. Nadeem, you're a great moderator.
Oh, thank you. This was my first webinar as a moderator. I think my first webinar period.
well done.
Great.
Well done.
And Afrah, I love the way you bring your personal with
Yes.
big geopolitical and kind of international issues that are so sticky and difficult and
thank you so much. Really delighted. I really appreciate the opportunity. And Nadeem, it's election season. Yalla, do your thing. We need you to discuss.
Yes,
I'm gonna say goodbye to our audience so that I can turn them off. And but thank you, and thank you for everybody for joining us.
Thank you.
Everyone watching us, please read the issue Blood. There are like a collection of wonderful essays. I hope that you all will enjoy it. And thank you so much.
Thank you.